Good evening, everyone. This is Luke Grand from Practical Farmers of Iowa. Let's get started. It's our first Farminar of the fall. So glad to have you all with us. I hope you can join us for many more Farminars throughout the fall series. Tonight is the first one. We're going to start with apple orchards insurance, crop insurance for apple orchards, and then all the way through December 10th with a week off for Thanksgiving. That's our schedule there. Feel free to mark your calendars and join us as many times as you can. We also record these Farminars, so you can also watch them online later at practicalfarmers.org/Farminar. We are so glad to get to offer these to folks and bring everybody together and learn from farmers and share knowledge with each other. Some of the things that Practical Farmers of Iowa values I wanted to start out with tonight is exploration. Farmers sharing what they know and trying to find out new information that works for them and their families and their businesses. And hopefully to solve some of these great on-farm challenges that we all face as farmers. We really care about diversity. We care about folks of all walks of life and all parts of the country to be successful farming and to have independent operations that are integrated with our ecosystems. We care about an agriculture that's ecologically sustainable and economically sustainable on a fair market system. And widespread ownership of land. A lot of places you're seeing a lot more consolidation year after year, and we believe that we need to slow down that consolidation and spread out the wealth and the ownership of resources. And of course, commitment to family, community, and the celebration of wholesome food has to be a part of a sustainable agriculture. Wanted to take a quick moment to recognize our co-founder Dick Thompson's passing this August. Dick Thompson, there in the middle, was a really wonderful person who set the tone as a farmer and the first farmer member of Practical Farmers of Iowa, co-founded this organization with his wife Sharon and Larry Callum way back in the heart of the farm crisis. So thank you very much, Dick Thompson, for all of your work, and we will remember you for many, many years. We believe in growing more than crops. That's the truth. We believe in growing people. Dick Thompson said that way back in the 80s, and that's carried true throughout our entire history. And we don't just grow crops, we grow people. We grow families, we grow communities, and the best way to do that is to learn from each other and share what we know. We get to do so many great things at Practical Farmers of Iowa, and one of my favorite things is get to talk about how great our farmers are. Here's a great example, Early Morning Harvest of Panora, Iowa. Got to get featured by a student group that was using the Lexicon of Sustainability art form, as you can see on the screen. And I actually got to share many of our farmers, information about many of our farmers to Washington, D.C. politicians this month. So we're really glad to get to celebrate those folks all the way into the state, the capital of the United States. So this is just one example of one of their pieces of artwork they did. You can check them out more at the Lexicon of Sustainability. They have a Facebook fan page and a website. If you're not already a member, I encourage you to join. We are a membership organization. About 20% of our funds come from the donations and membership dues of our members, about 2,200 members now across Iowa, and 12% of our members come from outside of Iowa. So there's something for everyone. Even if you don't live in Iowa, there's something to learn from our quarterly newsletter called The Practical Farmer that we deliver to members' members' mailboxes. And you can also get great discounts to our annual conference, which is in January. It's a great time to come to Iowa because you get to hang out with 600 of our best farmers that come together to learn from each other and share what they know. Here's a little more about our annual conference coming up in January 24th, 25th. Mark your calendars if you're able to join us. We'd sure love to have you. You can check out more information on our website. For students, it's just $15 for 2 whole days of conferences with farmers leading most of the sessions, and a great place to network with people who want to share what they know. It's a great vision we have for the future. We want to continue that with you as a member. Please join and continue to participate in our organization. We're at Practical Farmers of Iowa, the members really choose our direction. So we really encourage you to give us some great feedback. We'll be sending a survey after this Farminar so you can give us some feedback on how we could improve, or maybe some new topics you'd like to see. Heck, even some new speakers you'd like to see to speak on a Farminar coming up this winter or even next fall. So just for a refresher, in case this is your first Farminar, the way it works is that we spend about 30 to 60 minutes in the first part of the 90 minutes focused on the lecture. And then we also have 30 minutes reserved at least in the end for questions from you and discussion. But feel free to ask questions throughout if you need to clarify something. Use that chat box at the left. We've got a great presenter, Phil Larrabee, is going to start us out from Monticello, Iowa. He's a really interesting guy. He's a jack of all trades. He's a Renaissance man. He's a banker. He's a licensed insurance agent, and he loves apples. And he's excited to tell you how he's gotten crop insurance for his apple orchard in a state where apples are not an insurable crop. Thank you very much, Phil. You can turn on your mic and begin.
Okay, am I on? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I want to tell you thank you very much, and we're ready to go here. And I want to tell you thank you very much, Luke, for getting me on here tonight. For those of you who don't, I am a banker. I have, when I left college, I am a vice president at Citizen State Bank in Monticello, Iowa. I've been there now for about 7 years, and I've been in banking now for about 26 years after leaving college from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. I've also never planned on becoming an insurance agent until my old boss one day needed someone to sign a farm insurance form. So I went out and got my personal lines license, then picked up a crop insurance license, then I picked up a couple other licenses that just needed just for some other things here and there and everywhere. I do work for Citizen State Agency up in Hopkitten, Iowa, and the orchard or the agency there works through the Iowa Bankers Association, which is where I end up picking up the crop insurance through Great American. I'll get back to that here in a little bit. Also, as Luke said, I'm also an adjunct instructor at Kirkwood Community College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I've done that now for 11 years. I teach banking classes in the evenings, and actually tonight I will be teaching a class, but I volunteered to cancel my class, which I know my students were all super thrilled not to have to drive in on this nice, rainy, windy night in eastern Iowa to attend class. And lastly, if you think I'm not busy enough with my wife's businesses, because she's also part owner of her art studio business, plus also the apple orchard, I decided this year I went back and started a MBA project. Lots of fun here in doing all that, and this was kind of an interesting time. I never thought 26 years after being out of college I'd ever go back and start a MBA program, but I did finish my first class, and then I took a time off because I had some other projects to do. One thing that is very important to know about this orchard, that we are a orchard that's very young. It was started in 1998 by my father-in-law, Gene Gravert, and he was in a spot where he kind of wanted to start slowing down a little bit, not being quite so busy with farming, and so he decided that I'm going to eventually just kind of drop back a little bit and just eventually say I'm not going to be farming quite so much. I'm going to relax a little bit, and he decided he wanted to start his own apple orchard. So in 1998 he decided to start planting trees. He went through a list. What was kind of funny is that the Honeycrisp tree, which is the apple that everyone seems to want more and more of, he actually came across a book that had those, and he planted a full row. He was one of the first farmers in this eastern part of the state to plant them, and people, when they found out about that's when it all kind of went crazy for him. As he matured on his crop, he planted more and more trees. He worked his way up to about 450 trees, and then about 5 years into it, he finally had his very first full crop, and that was in 2003. Unfortunately, he never did get to see the end of his crop season. He was killed in a car accident. He actually he is one of the what we call it a statistician here in the state of Iowa. He had deer go through his windshield and kill him. And so the next day we decided, what do we do with the apple orchard? And we got the 3 kids sitting there, and I'm the only one who's married into the family, and we got a couple people there, and they're all sitting around and said, well, I think we can do this. And my wife stepped up to the plate and said to her mom, says, I think I can do this, and she became the pruning. She took over management of the operation. She had to get her spray license, and imagine a woman whose father never taught her anything about spraying, never taught any of the kids about spraying. She all at once, in about 60 days, had to learn how to spray apple trees, but not just that. Here in Iowa, you have to learn about how to spray corn and beans, because that's what the test is over, is actually corn and beans. So she worked on that very, very much. She did some neat things with the orchard, and we decided in 2004 to leave the orchard as is and just figure out what are we doing differently, how are we going to fix the orchard to anything she wanted to do. It was kind of fun to listen to these plans, because we've had people come back to us and tell us that in 2004, we really did not, how do I say this, have a clue what we were doing. People said we were running with our heads chopped off, not knowing what we were doing. And so we decided in 2005, we're going to expand the orchard, and we're going to do some, start up a nice new procedure where we're going to actually have a new facility where to sell apples out of. And we took this old machine shed, cemented it in, did a lot of nice work to it, and at the end created this wonderful sales floor. And you're actually seeing this is on, if you look here on the website that we're showing of the apple orchard, this is actually his old machine shed, and we built this lovely front, we sided it, and we took his building and turned it into a showroom floor. Eventually, we took the other half of it and we put more cooling space into it. We bought a sorting machine. We did everything we could, and that entire building to this day cannot even, it's just all for apples is all we're doing. This year, due to the heavy crop, we are probably going to end up expanding that orchard, that building some more, and had to put more cooling space in because we just truly have run out of cooling space. In that facility. But what really got us going into crop insurance was what happened to us in 2005. In 2005, we suffered a devastating late spring freeze. It killed everything. My wife went through the orchard in the fall and told me she picked a whole 15 to 20 bushels of apples out of the entire 600 plus trees. And she looked at me and said, we can't do this anymore. We just got started in this. We've got to find a way to cover our risk. And I said, yes, I understand. In 2006, we thought, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to come out of this. No problem. Once again, it happened all over again. But this time we didn't lose the whole orchard. We lost between a third to two-thirds of the orchard. And it was very difficult to find ways to get through this procedure. So in 2007, I started the process. Unfortunately, you're going to learn more about how much fun this is because you have to go through the process of getting a written agreement. And let's just start here right now with the process, because the first thing I had to learn was, when does your sales closing date, remember, a sales closing date in crop insurance tells you when you have to have your insurance and application to the USDA. Remember, the USDA is everything. They're the ones who decide what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and they pick all the dates. The very most important date is the sales closing date. If you noticed here in 2013, this is for a crop year for next year, my sales closing date is November 20th. And I think November 20th is, I always just kind of use the date of the third Friday in the month of November. Everything has to be turned in. And we'll go through the entire process of what goes on. Now, what's fun about doing all this work is that while we've had crop insurance every year, and in 2012, we got hit pretty hard. If you're anywhere in the Midwest last year in 2012, a lot of orchards got wiped out. Even the state of Michigan got wiped out pretty hard. And I was visiting with an individual who told me that some of the orchards up in Michigan actually bought apples and had them shipped in from the state of Washington just to make sure they had enough apples. But we were fortunate last year. Our orchard is located 6 miles north of the little town of Sebula, Iowa. Now, some of you are going, never heard of Sebula, Iowa. Well, Sebula, Iowa is a very unique town. It's the only island town in the state of Iowa. It's located as far east as you can get in the state of Iowa. So if you ever looked at the state map and you see that big bump that sticks out in the state, we're right at the very end of that bump right there is that little town. And we're located 6 miles north of that, so we are actually located just north and south of the Mississippi River. And the river helps us a lot. It keeps us warm, and it's sometimes, lack of a better word, it's our saving grace. A couple of things I want to tell you a little bit before we get started is that you're going to want to know in apples, when is your history of your fall and spring freezes and hard freezes. Now, in my case, the National Weather Service in the Quad Cities put together a nice form, and unfortunately I don't have that slide here for anyone to look at, But try to go to your National Weather Service office in your area. In this case, in the last 30 years, from 1981 to 2010, they listed the entire eastern Iowa for the National Weather Service out of the Quad Cities. The Quad Cities are just south of us, about an hour, and that's where Davenport, Bettendorf, Moline, and Rock Island is located at. And for those of you who don't know where that's at, and you ever watch golf, it's where the John Deere Classic is actually held at, down in that area. In this area here, though, we follow and make sure we know when is the first time in the spring we can have temperatures, hit a freeze for 32 degrees, and we know when they're going to hit a hard freeze. In our case, we always mark it out because we have towns north of us and south of us. So in our area, if in the spring, we know that any time between April 4th and May 28th, we could have a freeze, a 32-degree freeze. We can have a hard freeze anytime from March 28th to May the 8th in our vicinity. Now, why is that important? Well, Michigan State University is the experts in a lot of this information, and they tell us at what temperatures do you lose the crop. So, what we look at is we look at the apple temperatures. And when you are looking at certain things, we are really concerned about, when the leaves are coming on the trees, when the blossoms are on, when is the bloom. First thing to tell you is this: when you see the first bloom, that's when things are really critical. You can handle a temperature to 28 degrees, and you'll lose 10% of your crop, guaranteed, at 28 degrees. We're to the point now we don't even worry about 28 degrees because we can handle that. We know that. But when you get below 28, and they'll tell you from about 25 degrees to about 26 degrees, you can actually lose your entire, actually here it is, he's got it up here on the screen for us, that's good. You can lose your entire crop. That's a 90% kill at 25 degrees. And we always just kind of use 27 to 26 as our good gauge. If we can keep it above 27, we are typically okay. In last year's case, to show you how strange the weather is, our orchard is actually an east-facing orchard. It has a rolling hill to the east, and the west side is more flat. The east side falls down into a deep ravine, and the temperatures got so cold that we lost the bottom 4 rows of the orchard. Now, you would think that's kind of a strange way of saying bottom 4 rows. Well, we lost the Iowa State University apple called the Chieftain, we lost the Empires, the Liberties, and that lovely row called the Honeycrisp. The row that made it, going up, was the Red Delicious all the way up on top of the hill. And we found apples everywhere. Now, while they had some scars onto them from the freezing, it was just something that we noticed about the process. But we were still able to sell our apples and do okay. As a friend of mine last year told me, you may have the highest percentage of apples still left in the orchard, of any orchard across the Midwest, just because of you were so close to the river, and you were very fortunate to have that. So let's go back here and start my presentation here. Luke, do you have that my PowerPoint up here yet? Thanks. Okay, no problem. But he's going through loading up some stuff here for us so we can look at things, how we look at. By the way, just so you know, our orchard sits kind of a strange spot in the state of Iowa. It is the road that actually that leads up to our road, up to our farm, goes north. So the river actually makes a big turn in the state of Iowa, and the Mississippi River is actually closest to us when we look north and not to the east, like everyone would think it would be. The rivers would be to the east. So we're actually in a spot where we have river to the east and river to the north of us. Let's just pop down here. Okay, so we have the crop insurance. I sell through Iowa Bankers Insurance and Services, which is located in Johnston, Iowa. And they have the contract for our crop company called Great American Crop Insurance. And they're located out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And they are a massive, big company. And that's kind of an interesting way of saying it, because they sell a myriad of products other than just flat out what we're doing here with just crop insurance. Can you put that forward for me there? Okay, there it is, thanks. Now, one thing to remember about the crop insurance industry you have to meet USDA RMA standards. In certain states, like Iowa, Iowa has basically insurable crops for corn, soybeans, and wheat, especially on the southern part of the state down there in the southern part of the state. The part that you've got to remember is that all other crops are available to obtain insurance on. It's just they're not an insurable crop. That means you have to go through the entire process and have to get what they call a written agreement. And by a written agreement, that means this. You're taking an uninsurable crop and you're obtaining insurance on it in the state that you or in the area that you're at. In my case, Iowa has no insurance, as apples are not considered an insurable crop. Thus, we have to use the rates that are actually in a county just north of us in Crawford County, Wisconsin. Happens to be Wisconsin has a series of counties that do allow apples as an insurable crop. So we use those rates, and that's how we actually get our process into it. So we actually become insured. Now, what's also fun about this is that you have to submit the full application. The application then has to go through a regional office. It happens to be our regional office is in the St. Paul, Minnesota area. And you have to have everything. If you don't have all their paperwork in for it, they are not going to allow you to go forward. Okay, once again, back to some here. Important dates. Remember that sales closing date? That was the first problem I had, was I did not know what the sales closing date was, because no one knew what the Apple sales closing date was in Iowa for the Apple policy. I always thought it was March 15th, which is the same date as corn, soybeans here in the state of Iowa. Well, when I actually called and found out that it was actually in November, I always went, whoa, that was interesting. Now, the other part you remember is that you have to have your acreage reporting date also in by December 15th. What is your acreage reporting date? That tells you the number of acres of that you're going to produce on. In our case, we're a very small orchard. We're only 3.3 acres of land. Now people think, my gosh, how many trees can you put on 3.3 acres of land? We have over 600 plus trees on those 3.3 acres of land. It's a lot of work. And just between my wife, myself, her brother, his wife, our kids, it can take us all day just to mow that facility. But it takes my wife, though, who does all the pruning, and some of us will come out and help her once in a while, about 3 to 4 weeks to prune all 600 trees. And then we have one person who comes out, and all they do is pick up all the twigs and sticks and whatever else she's cut out of the trees during the pruning season. Pruning season, as all you know, occurs during February through about March, because the very first spray you put on happens to be in the month of April. Usually it's your oil spray. Okay, next part of the thing here is that when you obtain your insurance, the most important date is, when does your coverage begin? It begins the next day. So in this case, or in my case, whenever I sign my written agreement. And so typically we don't sign a written agreement until about December 5th, so we actually become uninsured for a period of time, but we don't have any apples trees out that way, or we don't have any apples on our trees, so we don't really care. So the first thing I remember is that when you're looking at this, you want to know what is your cause of loss that you can be covered for. Well, the first thing that we always worry about is freeze. So that's adverse weather conditions. Another one is a failure of the irrigation water supply. Well, in the Midwest, it rains here. You know, I know in California, we had some people in the other day, and they were just shocked that at our apple orchard, we don't water our trees. Because in California, where they live at, down in the southern part of the state, they have to water their trees. You actually have insurance on fire. Now, it has to be natural causes, though. We have insect damage, because here, but you also have to make sure you can show that you actually did spray correctly, too. If you didn't just spray, if you just flat out just walked away and didn't spray your orchard, and what's going on there, you just basically, walked away from it, they aren't going to cover you. But if you can show that you did all this proper spraying, all that, yes, insect damage is still considered an insurable loss. The one thing that's coming up on this part of the state is the Asian stink bug. The Asian stink bug is a bug that we're watching come in to the state of Iowa, and all apple orchards and all farmers are nervous about this bug because, number one, this bug loves the fruits. Now, we have read stories where they've actually destroyed an entire peach crop. Now, while we only have apples typically on our orchard and some pears, they do like all fruits. Now, by all fruits, they also like corn, they like beans, they like everything that's got fruit into it. And it happens to be, in this case, they like apples too. And they will destroy 40%, if not more, of an apple orchard, is what we've been hearing out in the East Coast. Now, Penn State University is working on this process, trying to find ways to control these bugs. And right now, the only thing that we've been able to read so far is there's a product called, let's see, it's called 7. 7 is a contact spray. It's also one of the most common sprays that's out that way. It's probably one of the most easiest sprays to get. The problem is it kills anything it touches. It kills the good bugs and the bad bugs. So that's why we're very careful with this spray, and we're very concerned about that. The other part you remember is that there are 2 other sprays that are actually coming out of Japan, and they are trying right now to get those sprays approved here in the States. But Penn State University is the university that's taking the charge on this process. Another important date you got to remember is your premium billing date. The premium billing date is when your premium bill shows up and says you got to pay this date. The one thing you got to remember about crop insurance is this: if you don't pay your bill, you don't get to apply for insurance next year. There's just no way of getting around it. They flat out tell you that. It's just a tough thing. The other thing is that if you ever have a loss and you haven't paid your bill yet, they'll deduct the loss right out of it. And I see somebody here said that 7 is very hard on honeybees. That's very true. It is very hard on honeybees. That's why when we spray 7 in our orchard, we make sure that the blossoms are all out of the orchard, are all gone, and that means the bees then have moved on to the next product that they could get into, which could be clover, it could be another tree blossom, it could be something else, and we are very careful with that. And that's why we have always been very careful around our orchards, making sure that we do not touch the honeybee, because the honeybee is our friend, and we also sell the honey that our local apiary makes for us, because if it wasn't for their bees, we wouldn't have an apple orchard. The next thing we want to look at here is when does your insurance end? Well, your insurance ends either at harvest or November 5th, whichever comes first. Now, typically in Iowa, we have a freeze before then, a hard freeze, in which all of our crop is gone by that time here at our orchard. If you're in the southern part of the state, you might be a little later in the year, but that's just part of where we're at. But typically by November 5th, we're almost picked up, and we've almost got the entire orchard picked. In our case this year yet, what's ironic is that we are still allowing yield picking going on. Now, we have something very strange in our orchard. Some people don't allow this, but we either pre-pick the orchard apples for us, or we allow people to go out and actually allow them to pick their own apples off the tree. And that was always a dream of my father-in-law's, was to let the people who don't live on farms have the opportunity to get out and actually experience what it's like to be on a farm. You'd be amazed the number of people who come to me who are in their 60s and 70s who will say, I've never picked an apple before off a tree. And we want to give them that experience, and that's one thing that we really do enjoy. Now, next part is, what I've gone through here, the cause of losses. By the way, it also covers hail, drought, even excess precipitation, which is kind of ironic because we've had some, this year in Iowa, the very first part of the year was very wet. The second part of the summer was very dry. We actually had 6 weeks of almost nothing for falling out of the sky, and which is also kind of a thing. But the other part is, look at that very bottom one, wildlife. Now, you would think that deer are our orchard is our worst pest. No. What we have found, and you're actually supposed to pick up all the apples underneath all the trees, and what we have found is that the deer are so thick around our orchard, we keep apples on the ground for one reason. When the deer is hungry, they're going to leave our tree alone. They know that tree is the last thing they want to eat, but they smell that wonderful sugar taste of an apple, and they will dig down through the snow to get that apple, and they'll leave our tree alone. Our worst predator is the cottontail rabbit, and they will girdle that tree faster than anything else we have seen. If that snow gets real deep, we have to go out and we have to literally take black trash bags and wrap the bases of those trees just to make sure that those trees are not being adversely affected by that problem. And we have actually lost a lot of trees over the years thanks to rabbits. How do we actually control the rabbits? Well, everyone says, well, you can use natural selection, or you bring in a predator in. And typically what we do is we have a couple guys who come in with their beagles, and they will actually run the rabbits out of the area. So that's kind of just some things you got to do. Now, the other part is that you've got to also look here. There's some other things here on some causes of loss. Once again, fire is in there. One of the things you've got to watch for is under the tree. You cannot let the undergrowth get too tall. If you let your undergrowth get too tall under there, you allow some other common pests get in there. The mole, the vole, they are phenomenal at killing trees, especially during drought years. We have to really watch a lot of trees that they love to get in around the roots. And as soon as we get a nice weather, a little bit of a rain and a little bit of wind, that tree tips over, and we got to pull that tree back up. And sometimes they actually kill the tree on their own. But the one thing I do is if you keep that underneath that tree mowed, that mole and that vole will not come back. They'll stay away because they want that taller grass and they want that shade. That's what they're looking for. Now, the other part is that you have to control all your pests. And sometimes a pest can be the family dog. So be careful. Family dogs love to dig under trees. They love to dig for mice, love to dig for stuff out in these orchards. You got to be careful. Make sure your dog is not always doing things they shouldn't be doing. In our case, we have to go out and actually chain our dog up or put him in a kennel for a while so he doesn't do some things. Now, first thing you got to do when you get into crop insurance is you got to know these very important things. What is your farm number, your tract number, and your field number? The only way you can get this information is by going to your local FSA office. Now, that's your FSA stands for Farm Service Agency. In our case, our local FSA office is located in Maquoketa, Iowa. Here in Jones County, where I'm talking to you from, you go to Anamosa. But who can get this information? Well, only at the bottom here, only the owner or the owners on the farm can obtain this information. So for me, I go to my mother-in-law and Diane, and I said, Diane, this is the information I need. It's waiting for you here. I can't get it, but only you can get it because you are the owner of the farm. This is very important. It's due to privacy law, and you just can't get this. In my case, I know this information, and as soon as I got it from my mother-in-law, I wrote it down so I'd never have to ask her again for it, because the last thing I want to do is bug her too many times to make sure that I have, so why not? Just keep this information steady and you have it. But you can always go back to the FSA office and pick it up. Now, the first part you got to remember about how do you complete the apple orchard paperwork? Well, the very first thing is this. You need to get the crop insurance handbook out. And I'm going to warn you, it's a big, thick book written by the USDA. It's not written by anyone who knows how to do it, write anything easy, and you got to read the material. You should look on pages 255 to about 256. That's where I usually go to in that vicinity. That usually covers all the apple information. And there is a pile of stuff you got to do. I know Luke's got a copy of it. If he has time, to maybe you can put it up here. But if not, it goes on and on and on. There's everything you have to answer, and they go right through. Slide down if you could there. Here, if I could pull. There it is. Right here. This is what you got to do. Start here on. You have to have pick records. You have to go through your pre-harvest appraisal. We'll talk more about that here. Your pick records have to be very important. One of the things that I will tell you, when you slide down here on the bottom of this a little bit, is there is a section that talks about your pay records. And we'll get into that here a little bit more here in a second here. Because typically, in apple orchards, who picks the apple? Typically, it's a migrant worker. In our case, we're too small to hire migrant workers, so we do them all ourselves. And that's just how we handle it, is in our way. But if you're a big orchard, you've got to really watch that information, because they're actually asking you for additional information if you hire people. And the big thing is there, number one, is that you've got to make sure that you pay their Social Security tax. If you cannot prove that you pay that, especially if you have a lot of workers help picking your orchard, you cannot obtain insurance. Now, this is the part that I always tell the USDA when I called and talked to them up in St. Paul, Minnesota. I said, when did the USDA change its name to the IRS? And the guy started laughing until he started realizing that I can raise 5,000 acres of corn. I can have 22 men work for me, and they never ask me for their actually, showing that I pay their Social Security. But if I have an apple orchard and I hire people, I have to show that information to them. Now, the one part is that used to be it was pretty easy to get that, because in banking, when you pay your Social Security tax, you usually pay a 941 form. Well, anymore, you don't pay you don't use forms. Everything's electronic. So you have to keep your electronic records, or you have to keep your own hard copy records that you keep at home. It's very important that you become very detailed, and very important that you keep very good records. And that's the most important part about this whole story. You want to go back to the slide, to the PowerPoint, and we'll go on from there. Luke?
Yeah.
You got the PowerPoint coming back? Okay, hang in there. We're coming right back to PowerPoint. That's where we want to go back to. Bear with me here until I get myself where I need to be. Oops, there it is. The pre-harvest appraisal. The pre-harvest appraisal is kind of a fun process, especially when you got guys who work for Great American, who all they ever see is corn and beans. Because they come to you and tell you, this is fun because it's something different. What are they looking at? Well, a field supervisor comes to your orchard and estimates the number of bushels of apples you will pick for the year. It's kind of fun to watch them. They go out and they actually have a little hand counter and they start counting apples on a tree. It sounds like, are you kidding me? But they actually have to start counting apples on a tree. And they'll go through and say, okay, now we know in this row, which is the Gravestein apple, each tree should have estimated 80 apples per tree. They go to the Johnny Gold and it's, okay, they got 110. They will guesstimate what my actual harvest will be before I even have a harvest. Now the part you got to remember is that in apples, we also have what they call June drop. So they try to make sure they do this appraisal after the June drop. But now what my guys are doing is they're doing about that time, but they also go back and they verify to see how good their records are at the end of the year, and just to see how good are we actually estimating. Because these guys here don't actually have the ability to, they don't do this enough, so they don't know if they're actually getting records correct, incorrect, or what they are. Now, the pre-harvest appraisal is required if your production is marketed directly to consumers. Well, every apple orchard in Iowa, or most of them, sell apples right to consumers. Very few apple orchards do I know who do not, and they all just sell to a right directly to a market. But in this case here, we sell directly, so we have to have this report. This is very important, and this is one thing that they have a copy of. And when I'm doing my forms here this next week, I got to get the copy of this and put that together with my paperwork. One more thing you have to have a map detailing your orchard, detailing by variety. They want to know how many trees, of Honeycrisp do you have. In this row, I have 30. In this row, I have 10. How many galas do I have? How many Pacific galas? How many Scarlet galas do I have? How many John Golds? How many Braeburns? Whatever you have. They want to know the varieties. They want to know how many there is. Then what happens is they go through and they block the orchard. And this is just something that they do. They know how to do it. So anyone who comes to the orchard from now on will be able to pick up and say, okay, in this block we have Braeburns, Fuji's, and we have some Honeycrisp. In this block here, we have Golden Delicious, we have some Johnny Golds, and we have, lo and behold, we have some Galas stuck in this side of it. Or we have some Pristines and some Empires over here. And every time we add something new, we have to make our map bigger, newer, and better so they know what's going on. And it just allows anyone who comes from anywhere to actually be able to verify. That's the one reason I keep telling people is that you must be very detail-orientated. Your pick records. Now this here gets kind of fun. You have to have at least 3 years of pick records before you can even apply for a written agreement. In our case, we were very fortunate. My wife had those records. She was very good about it, and she had that information all down. So pick records must be legible and understandable to anyone who looks at them. So what do you got to do? Well, all we ever do is we just have a little form that says on this date, 9/18, we picked 32 bushels of Gala, and behind the name you put whoever picked it. In this case, my wife picks between 90 to 95% of all the apples. She is very detail-orientated. What she wants to do is, she's our quality control person. She wants to make sure that everything is correct. She wants to make sure that when it starts for the year and how it ends for the year. She would rather work in the orchard and not sell an apple to the public, where she knows that I could not work in the orchard, but I would be the one who would sell the apple to the public. And she wants to make sure that what starts the year ends as a very good apple, and she wants to make sure it's very important. So our pick records have to be very important. It's very interesting. On the screen here, we actually go by variety, and we go by when they're actually picked. Now, we have our own diagram, but we also have to keep all the original records, because they want to see an overall summary, and they want to see actually all the records when they were picked, who signed for it, and who did what. It's an important process they go through. And the reason they do that is, once again, go back to that old famous word, documentation, documentation, documentation. Because if somebody actually wants to verify what I did, that's what I got to do. Now, the other part of the pick records you got to have is just not what you picked. You got to have your sales records also to go with this. And you're going, you got to be kidding me. That's just, to me, it's one of the craziest things to do. I just don't have my pick records. I got to know what I sell. In our case, we're so small that when we bring the apple, we bring the bushel in. The first thing we do is we throw what we call an unsorted card into the bushel basket, or in the bushel box. So we may have Red Delicious in there. We just throw a card in that says unsorted Red Delicious. When it goes through the machine, the sorting machine, we get rid of the small ones, the Bs. I call them the B apples. Those become the apples we might use for apple cider. But we keep the A's and double A apples to sell off with them. So we have a pink card for the cards. That means they're seconds, which means that we're going to use those for apple cider. And we keep a white card, which says white card that says Red Delicious onto it, so we know these are the ones that go for sale. As we go through the box, we just take it over, throw it in a little container. That's what we sold that weekend. And someone counts them up and says, okay, we sold on this weekend 5 bushels of Red Delicious, 6 bushels of Golden Delicious, 10 bushels of Brayburns, whatever. And we have to then match it up to, of all things, what the day's receipts are. In our case, we don't do day's receipts, we do weekend receipts. And as long as we're able to prove that, they have no problem with that information, as long as we have that. What's the next part here, Luke, on the PowerPoint? And Luke's just showing you different ways of how we actually verify what we pick and how we do those things there. Okay, once again, they must be legible and they must be understandable. Now, they also must include the date, the variety, the number of bushels picked, and it must be signed by the person. And they require that name of the person who picked the apples and is paid by the grower. In our case, most of the apples are picked by my wife. So what happens? She never pays Social Security because she gets paid at the very end of the season, and we just do it on a 1040 form for farming. It's a Schedule F, and that's how we run it through. Now, you must also put down here, if you are showing things, how are you paying your picker? You know, in this case here, you have to show what the price is paid per bushel. The insured must identify a price paid per volume picked if we're picking the crop, and the price must also be on the basis of insurable unit, which is basically the bushel box. And you must have all copies of your paperwork always photocopied. Everything goes in. When my paperwork goes in, I have about 60 to 100 pages of paperwork that goes in to USDA to obtain my written agreement. Now, once again, you must have a summary of each picker's total. You must have a summary by the variety of the apples picked. And if you hire one to pick your crop then, hang on here, it didn't go over. Luke, it's not going forward. Can you get to go forward for me?
Yeah, that's funny. Must have imported poorly. I'll try to open up another one.
Okay. Then you have to keep those additional records for Social Security and things for them. The part you also got to remember is that when you're working with apples, somewhere along the way, and I've yet to ever figure out where the USDA comes up with this information, they actually have a nice place that tells you what is the price for apples in the United States. And I have yet to figure out where the open market is for apples. I wish I could find that someplace because it's kind of a fun time to go find that.
I didn't, unfortunately.
Do you have any luck there, Luke?
Copy I downloaded from your email. This is the last slide.
That's the last slide. Okay. Well, anyway, we'll slide on here for a couple other things to talk about here. A couple of things you need to think about is that when you have all this information, you fill the paperwork out. Unfortunately, I can't show you the paperwork unless Luke can find some of the actual, there it is. That's some of your actual paperwork that you fill out. You have to fill out your paperwork. You want to flip that over to the next page there. Okay, this is actually part of what we do, and this is some information that deals with our written agreement. And this is how a written agreement looks like when you get to it. It actually tells you what you're insured for, what your rates are, and Gary Lukey from the USDA RMA will actually provide that. The paperwork that you get contains additional information. It tells you where your orchard is at, how big your orchard is, all that, and it's just what you read right there across of all it is. There are lots of paperwork that you actually fill in. And the written agreement is just that. It's a written agreement that says, we agree to insure your apples for you. Now, we are the only apple orchard in the state of Iowa who actually has crop insurance for their federal crop insurance for their apple orchard. Many other orchards have tried, but have failed because they don't understand there's so many pages of documentation you must provide with your process. And one orchard that we've talked to, tried to help them with, they have actually given up and just called it good and just wung up with, just said, we'll just play with it as we go. One orchard down in the southern part of the state, she's actually a crop insurance agent also. I provided all this documentation to help her with the exact same process, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at stuff. Now, the one more thing that you got to remember about written agreements. They are not the easiest thing to do. So you've got to find an agent who will sit down with you and work your way through the process. In this case, who's going to help me? Nobody. It's just myself. I'm the one who actually goes through and does it all. And other than asking a few questions and to somebody who's an expert, a great American, that's my expertise. Thank goodness that I have some people who are really good about that. The one part you got to remember also is that when you buy your insurance, you need to make sure that you decide at what % coverage are you going to do. Are you going to do 50% of your crop all the way up to 75% of crop? Because the most you can never do is 75%. But as you know, in all things that work with insurance, as this curve goes up with the percentage, the price escalates. In our case, we cover 65% of our crop is all we ever cover. And the reason we do that is that at 70% and at 75%, the cost gets is actually prohibitive to us, and we decide not to. It's not worth our time to spend the money for it. Now, the part is that people want to know is, what does it cost for us? Well, in our little orchard, we can actually buy a policy. It is actually, crop insurance is subsidized through the Farm Bill. Our policy actually runs about $880, but when you go through the subsidies that come from the Farm Bill and everything else, we're actually paying somewhere around $300 or so is all we're paying. And we're getting about $11,000 to $12,000 of liability coverage. It's not a lot, but when you think about it, what are your input costs? And that's our big concern for us is what do we want to spend on our input costs? Apple orchards run usually $3,000 to $4,000 a year just in sprays. You have your fuel, so you have another couple $1,000 and maybe in fuel and whatever else it takes to get that stuff done. So basically, if we had a wipeout, we cover our basic costs. And our goal is we don't want to lose money on the deal every year, but we want to at least do risk management. And that's the one thing as a banker I will tell you that is very important is that please take time to cover your risk. Risk management is very important. I have farmers who I deal with every day, and I tell them point blank, what kind of crop insurance are you going to have for your corn and beans this year? Risk management is everything. Why? Don't be out there putting yourself at risk when you can, for a reasonable price, afford to buy some sort of crop insurance for your farm or for your orchard. This is just a good risk management policy. It's like this: why would you own a home if you're not going to insure it? I mean, a house would cost you, to rebuild it could cost you $300,000 or $400,000 to rebuild. This is what insurance is good for. And what is the chances of actually having a wipeout? You never know. it's very slim. In our case, we've had, since we've taken over the orchard, we have lost the full orchard once, and we've lost parts of the orchard 2 to 3 times during those 10 years. It takes one time, and that was in 2005 when we had no money coming in off the orchard. And finally, we just said, that's enough of this. We can't afford to do this too much more because it's time, it's expense. And the one part you remember is in 2005, we had to make sure we just did not. You always spray your trees. So the 18 times we took to spray our trees, we had to spray them 18 times. We had to make sure we pruned them right. We had to keep the yard place mowed, everything. Because if you don't take care of your trees, what are you going to have for the next year? You're going to have not a very good crop. And it's so important to have that good crop with it. The other part here that I want to talk about just briefly is that as we go through this process, your agent that you will work with may use a little different program than what I'm using. It all depends, but everyone uses the same number of, this is the requirements through the USDA that you have to follow. Paperwork typically is the same, but maybe the way you have to sign some things, you may have to do things a little differently. I know the guys that I deal with through Great American always call over and talk to a Great American field supervisor from Illinois because she does a lot more apple orchards. And in that district, they also do the apple orchards in Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And Michigan is one of those great big states that has lots of apple orchards and lots of other fruit orchards into it. Okay, I think I've covered about everything. Luke, do you have anything else you want to cover?
Let's open it up for questions from folks. I know there were a couple questions earlier, and let's make sure folks get their chance to talk about what's most important to them and ask their questions to get answered tonight. Maybe while they're thinking about it,
okay.
I was interested to hear your perspective on, when should someone, there's a lot of beginning farmers that are getting started, when should they start thinking about a crop insurance option?
Oh, it's the very first thing you do. Even before you even think about, after you've decided what you're going to do. If you're going to row crop corn or beans, before you even go see the banker to borrow any money or whoever you're borrowing the money from, you're going to want to make sure that you actually you talk to an insurance agent. Say, what do I need to do? Now, the problem I find is a lot of guys who are in some of these things wait until the last minute and they plant a crop and they can't get paid insurance because they missed the sales closing date. So I always tell people is this. If you remember, if you're in apples, November 20th. In corn and beans, it's March 15th. You've got to have that stuff in place and get started onto it. Otherwise, you're 100% at risk. And what else is there? Maybe you can buy some other policy, but it's not going to be a federal crop insurance policy. It's going to be something that basically doesn't cover squat. And you want to make sure it covers it. By the way, the one thing you want to do also, if you're a corn and bean guy, flat out, get the RA coverage called revenue assurance. Don't take that chance. Make sure you're always covered for revenue insurance. Happens to be in apple orchards, we don't have revenue assurance, but at least we have, we call multi-peril crop insurance, which covers our basic costs. Yep. And that's what we're looking for, is to cover that.
Kathy's got a question.
Okay, with a storm loss and you have trees down, are you allowed to sell the applewood? Well, you can sell the applewood because the tree is, if the tree is destroyed, you probably can sell the applewood. The problem that we have found in our orchard is that even with all the prunings, you're going to have more applewood than you know what to do with. Sorry to tell you that. We actually, at the end of the year, it sounds sad, but we actually, somewhere during the year after a good rain, we have piles and piles of prunings just laying around, and we only basically sell maybe, a couple feet of, maybe 10, 15 feet of applewood out of the orchard, and the rest of it we literally have to burn. And just because it's usually a good harvest or a nesting place for rabbits to stay into. Applewood is usually, the only people who usually buy the applewood are those who are going to smoke a turkey or smoke something else that they want for Thanksgiving or for a special meal. But it's the one thing I would like to do is, I'm still trying to figure out how to get this done at the apple orchard, is I would like to find a way to actually chop that or grind all of that applewood up and then sell that as a underbrush. So you can actually use it to, as instead of using cypress around your trees, you actually spread applewood around your trees. And that's one thing I've always wanted to do, and I have yet to figure out why it's so darn expensive to get a good chopper to chop up all your all your prunings and stuff. It's kind of what I'm like to do. I've checked into it. It just is so expensive just to have those shredding machines go through. I think one I would need would be run about $3,000 to $4,000, and I think we figured out it would take me about a year to 2 years just to break even on that. And the part that's funny about it is who am I going to sell all that stuff to? And we have yet to find the market yet in our area to sell all that shredded up applewood and stuff. It's kind of an interesting process, but we're still looking at ways to diversify. And while we're pruning things out, we want to find ways to use that product to our advantage. It's something that we'd like to do, but we just haven't found all the right avenues, and we haven't found all the right markets yet for people to come and use it yet. And we're doing your questions so far. Let me see here. I see someone here is from Indiana, Southeast Indiana. You must be you're Memphis, Tennessee tonight, and it's hailing there. Yes, hail is insurable. You are insured under hail. The one thing that I will warn you is that it doesn't take much hail to destroy an apple orchard. And a couple of years ago, if just about 20 miles west of where I'm at today, I think it was 2 years ago, hail went through Marion and Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and there are 2 or 3 orchards there, and unfortunately, they were devastated. And what that hail does is it just, besides just destroying the tree, it pulls the leaves down, it takes the apple off, and it pits the apple. What's ironic about our apple orchard is that my mother-in-law lives in this spot, and we don't understand why it is, but they have lived on this farm she's lived on this farm for about 40 years or so. In those 40 years, they can count the number of times it's hailed once. They know it's only hailed one time, and that year we went out and looked at the apples, and there were pits into it. Now, is that apple destroyed yet? No, it's not destroyed yet. It's not until it falls on the ground and is totally destroyed, that's when it becomes a loss. While it's still in a tree, it can still be turned into an apple cider apple. And unfortunately, you can also sell that apple to your customer. One year we had a part of our orchard get hit by a couple of hailstones, and you could tell immediately right where it got hit at. And we had to instruct our customer, this is what hail does to an apple. Unfortunately, we were very fortunate in this case. We did not have to try to discount the apple at all, because it was just one peck. And one more thing that we find on some of our apples is birds just love to peck apples, and they take that beak and they beak it, and they're hard. And you have to explain that also to a customer. That's actually what they call an apple peck. Now, a couple of things to talk about here while we're waiting for some questions to come through is that apples are a lot of fun to grow, and we enjoy this process. If you, this is the one thing that I tell my wife, is that you've got to enjoy being outside. We make sure that we have our kids with us. Our oldest is a senior in high school, and she has found out that not only can she have a job at the apple orchard and make money, but she can get outside, she can enjoy what nature's doing. Our youngest, we have some animals on the side that we take care of for people to come when they come to our orchard, and it's always kind of fun. Now, someone asked me a question, do we grow blueberries? Well, blueberries are an interesting crop. Blueberries require you to have acidic soil. And where my apple orchard is, where my wife's apple orchard is, I should say, the soil is very clay. So we are not acidic. But we can grow blueberries if we add acid to the soil. There is an apple orchard about 20 miles away, and they have planted 2 acres of blueberries. Now, what they're going to do there is they're putting them on sand. And they're going to add acid to the soil, because it's pretty easy to add acid to sand and get those blueberries to grow. But we're doing something totally different at our orchard. Some of you actually know what a high tunnel is. Here in the Midwest, a high tunnel helps us put plants in early, and so we actually started our tomato plants outside back in March, and those tomato plants are still going strong today. Now we'll probably open up the doors this weekend and let all the tomatoes die inside. But we're planting inside our high tunnel is something very close to a blueberry. And it is a June service berry called the Saskatoon. And that's what we're doing, is we're also trying to do that. Now we're keeping those inside the high tunnel because the part about a Saskatoon is that it's very important that we work with them, and they are needed to be stored inside because they're so sweet. The birds like to come by as soon as they're ready, as berries are on there, they come by and steal all the berries off. And our goal here is to keep the berries and eventually have them so we can sell the berries off to people or make them into jams and jellies and sell them that way. The other part I'll tell you about Saskatoon is that my wife informed me that they can grow anywhere from all the way from up in Canada all the way to the south, and they're a very neat thing. You see them actually wild in the roadside ditches, and that's what deer and birds just love them. And they usually come about late May, early June. There is a time in which they are very much, and people like them a lot, especially the birds do. Now, a friend of mine who was up in Canada told me he actually got to try some Saskatoons, and he says they're the most sweetest berry he's ever had. But he also was told by the guy is that don't eat too many of them, or you might get very ill. It's a lot of fun, and we do some neat stuff with them. But we just started that project here. There is a project through the USDA. It used to be, I don't know if it's still available or not anymore, in which you can actually get a grant to build your high tunnel, and the USDA or through the NRCS office would actually pay for it. Now, the other part that's neat about this is that process is fun to be with, is that we can grow other things into it while we're waiting. In this case, we've actually planted rhubarb all around it. That's another side crop we're going to eventually start selling here in a couple of years. We're waiting for the rhubarb to grow. We plant strawberry plants inside, and we can also have some more additional side crops. In our orchard, we also have a couple of other things that we work on. We work on some other things. We have pear trees. We're finding out that people are looking for pears. This is one thing we have. We have three varieties: an early variety, a middle variety. So we have I forget what the early variety is called, but the middle variety is called Bartlett, and the later variety is called Bosch. And people are just floored that we have those types of fruits also. We also, by accident, planted a couple of different things that we just thought, well, we'll just see if they work or not. We used, we worked on, even a peach tree, and lo and behold, we've been able to keep our peach trees alive longer than what you should here in this far north, and that's because even Iowa State University tells us that we plant them on the right side of the hill, which is the east slope. So in the morning, the sun comes right up and warms them up. In the evenings, when the wind blows across from the west, it blows the cold air right above them, so they don't get cold. Now, the other thing to talk about is that we are structured in your business plan. Be very careful. Do you want to be a sole proprietorship? Do you want to be an LLC, which is a limited liability corporation, or do you want to be just a corporation of some sort or a partnership? In banking, I will tell you the way that you take the most risk is being a sole proprietorship. There's nothing wrong with it, though. I have no problem with it. I think it's a neat idea. It's the easiest form of way of structuring your business. In our case, we started an LLC, limited liability corporation, and the reason was we tried to limit the liability to my mother-in-law. Because why? It's her farm. She doesn't want to take a chance of someone coming on the orchard and trying to, if something goes wrong, and trying to sue her and destroying and taking the farm away from her. Because that's actually her. That's where her and my father-in-law have lived for many years. They want to enjoy that place. How do you start up a limited liability corporation? It's very easy to start up a limited liability corporation. Go see your attorney. It's one-page document. It's called an Articles of Organization. Inside it tells who is the members or who is a member of the organization. And the one thing I remember is that everyone who is a member, there are those who are members, and there are those who are managing members. So you want to make sure you tell people, in the document, who is my managing member and who is my member. And the managing member is in charge. In this case here, my mother-in-law is in charge because she is the managing member. My wife, though, she's a member of the corporate of the LLC. Is all she is, and that's what she does all the work. She's the manager, and some days she'll take over. Now, if you're a partnership, remember, if you're a partnership and you have two partners into it, and one partner leaves, and there's debt against the organization, the person who is left gets hung with the entire bill because it's just like a joint owner is what you are. And in corporations, it also works that way also. Be careful in corporations. Remember, you don't want to spend a lot of money on that stuff. Just anymore, the LLC seems to be the easiest way to do it. It doesn't take too long. It's usually an hour or two work for the attorney. And every 2 years, you have to file. And in the state of Iowa, we have to file what they call a biannual agreement. So the state of Iowa knows that your LLC is still alive and well. Cost of those things are very minimal, and that's why when they made the LLCs, that was the reason they put it together, was to do that for people, was to keep the cost minimal to the people. Something else you want to think about is that when you're in a smaller organization, you got to watch your costs. Because remember, economies of scale. The bigger you are, the more you can handle. We have friends who run apple orchards up in Wisconsin who run 60, 80, 100 acres of apples. The only thing that we find with that is that they have to hire a lot of people, a lot of staff, and a lot of expense, where we can control it through our own hands. Very seldom do we hire anyone outside the immediate family or outside of the cousins of my wife's family to work for us. Typically, it's all we ever hire. It's usually when you walk on our orchard, the people you meet are either an in-law, a family member, or they're a cousin of the family. And that's how we control our cost. Watch those costs, though. It's very important. Remember, you're not in the business to just sit there and have fun, which is fun to have, but you're also there to make some money. Because remember, you have taken some risk, and you want to have some reward for it. Costs, though, on these trees can range anywhere from, they can be minimal to some of the costs of these trees that we plant are very expensive. One tree that we plant comes out of Kansas, and it's called a Bonnie's Best. And if you ever get a Bonnie's Best apple, you will want to make it into an apple pie, but that tree will run you $20 to $30 per tree. The problem we find, though, is that once people get into that tree and they really enjoy the apple, we don't have enough production, so we've had to plant more of those trees in hand. This is the first year we've even had a local grocery store call us and said, we're having a demand for your Bonnie's Best, which is a great apple to have, and people just love it because it's really good for baking. Watch those things also. A couple of our trees that we plant or have on the orchard, you can't find anymore. Like the Iowa State University tree called the Chieftain. It's a Jonathan and a Red Delicious mix. I don't think we can find them anymore in any of the trade magazines to actually have to plant anymore. It's an interesting apple to have. You would think that a Jonathan and a Red Delicious would be that Red Delicious has a nice, crisp, clean, crispy taste. It's sweet, and a Jonathan's an old-fashioned kind of a little bit tartar taste. But you get something totally different when those two come together. And while we have those those trees on the farm, you go to a lot of orchards. They don't have those. And one thing that we do at our orchard is we like to have a variety. We have like 20 to 23 different varieties of trees. And the reason being is that we can't, you just don't want to continually have the same thing. Gala, Johnny Gold, this Golden Delicious. That's the one thing we find. We talked to a couple who came from Germany this year. They said, oh, the Gravestein apple, we know that apple. We see it over in Germany, but not as much as we used to. I said, so what do you see growing now in Germany? They said the Honeycrisp, the Gala, the Chieftain, or not the Chieftain, but the Honeycrisp, the Gala, the Zestar, and keep going on the list. We see the same things that you see here. We just don't see those apples anymore. And what we do is we try to make sure at our orchard, we want to give people a taste of something different. We have an apple that actually, when you taste it, has a brown sugar taste to it. That's called the Zestar. We have an apple called the Sweet 16. If you're a lover of black licorice and you don't mind the taste of it, and you let the juice sit on your tongue a little longer, you can actually get the taste of black licorice at the end. We had an apple this year that came in. It was a Swiss gourmet apple. I think it actually gave you the taste of a banana at the end. It was kind of fun. We have an apple. It's called, I can't remember the name of the apple right at the moment, but it's actually an apple's version of a pear. It's very thick. It's very fibrous. It was an apple that was brought here by the pioneers found as they came across the Midwest, and it's called Toman Sweets, what they call it. We even had an apple in it earlier this year that I thought had a taste of a little rhubarb coming at the end of it. Apples do different things, and what we try to do is we just don't want you to get used to the ones you see in the grocery store. We want you to give it experience, to taste something different. Don't be afraid to try something different. We have people who call and said, we cannot find a good tart apple, so we have what they call a Cox's Orange Pippin. It's our second most tart apple on the farm. It comes from England. It's an English tea apple. And some people just think it's the most tart apple they can find. And then we've had one year a guy came and says, I want something tarter than the Cox's Orange Pippin. So we found an ash meets kernel. Now, the woman will warn you, you plant that tree, it is the ugliest looking apple you'll ever see. It's a nice apple to have, but it is the tartest apple on our orchard. And we have taken people who said that is too tart for them. And they said, we love really tart apples. So that's the one thing we do at our orchards. We try to make sure you get different things into them. If you ever want to watch a little video on our orchard, it's up on kwqc.com. That's K as in Kathy, W is William, Q is Queen, C is Charlie.com. And it is the Channel 6 news out of the Quad Cities. You want to go to Paula Sands Live, which is also known as PSL. Hit on that function, go up, and you can actually watch a 4 to 5 minute video that they actually produced on our orchard this year. You'll have to go down to the bottom and scroll through and look back on October 29th or so if you're looking for it. And it explains how our U-Pick works. You can see kids working on it. You see people talking about our apples and how our orchard looked. And this year the apples were just super thick. They were very heavy. I also see somebody here says that we planted, intensively planted a minimum of 5 acres. Yes. But what's funny is we actually followed the guidelines of how far a tree should be apart in rows and how far they should be in that row between each tree. And that is, you're going to laugh. We actually had a tape measure out there when they were actually planting them to make sure that we're actually so many feet between the rows and so many feet going down between the trees. Now, we also in our orchard, we have an individual who says, if you have an orchard with multiple varieties of such as apples, pears, cherries, and apricots, and rhubarbs, and grapes, with that many varieties, does it become difficult to obtain insurance? Remember, we only cover insurance, we only apply for insurance on our apple orchard, on the apples. If you want to, you can go on, but we don't have enough grapes to insure. We've only got about 10 feet of grapes growing. We have 8 or 9 cherry trees. We don't worry about insuring those because we don't have enough of those to do. You've got to make sure you have a large volume of those things. By the way, one thing we've noticed about cherries, if you have started an orchard, or you have an orchard and this is a good second crop to put in, because people don't like to grow cherries in their front yard anymore. It's a mess. And the birds come by and pick them, and what do birds do? They make messes on their yard, on their house. So people come out to our orchard and pick their own cherries. The one thing to remember is that in our part of the country, cherries are a tart cherry. There is, though, they are working on a sweet cherry to be that can go this far north in these zones. And we are going to try one, I think, this next year, try to plant one and just see how it works out, if it can handle this zone. The other part to tell you is that when we just work on apples only, that's our big concern, is just the apples only. We have just the other side crops that we do. And that'll be the cherries, the pears, and that stuff. Because we don't have a big demand for, I'd be shocked if somebody would come to us and say, can you plant 3.3 acres of just pears? Well, we don't have enough pears. We'd have to find a market for them because people just come and buy apples like crazy. It's all we can do. But we have to do some more stuff. Let me see here. When you're at that, I see he's putting it up here on the Paula Sands Live how you can get to the to watch the video. And in the video, you'll see that my wife is in the picture only once or twice, and she is actually making apple cider that day. We are one of the few that still make apple cider here in the state of Iowa, and it's not pasteurized. And we have people who drive 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 miles just to buy our apple cider because it's the real stuff. It's not the not the apple juice that's been pasteurized and sold in that place. A couple other things to remember about insurance. You can obtain insurance for other products, for other crops. Everything has you have a possibility of obtaining insurance on any crop you want to buy or plant. I've had people try to insure grapes. And by the way, in Iowa, there is only one vineyard that has federal crop insurance. And I knew that last year. I've got Maury Wills, who is from the Iowa Department of Agriculture. He also runs an organic orchard. He's the only organic orchard in the state of Iowa that I know of. And he actually told me last year when the crops all failed in this area and when it got so cold that they knew there was one apple orchard that had federal crop insurance and one grape vineyard, and that's all there was. And you can also receive that also through a written agreement. It's a nice process to do that. I'm trying to think here. Is there anything else we have any more stuff on we want to talk about? Let's see, blueberries. We talked about that. And let's see here. Apologize for hitting my microphone. Business structure. We talked about that. Landowners and stuff. Just to let you know, on landowners, be very careful on landowners. If you decide that you're going to take over someone's orchard that is owned on somebody else's property, please remember one thing. It's their property. And sometimes, especially if people get a little nervous when they have new people on their farm working it. In our case, we make sure that when not only are we on the farm working it because it's our family farm, but we also make sure we allow other people to enjoy the views, getting to use the orchard, to walk the orchard. And that's one thing I will warn you about is we have found that people come all the way from Chicago out to our farm for one reason, because they don't get to see a farm. They don't see that out there. And they want to have their kids experience what's like. Occasionally, we have even given kids rides on the tractor just because it's something we can do for them. To give them experience of this is what a farmer's like. They don't know where, as a friend of mine told me one day, he said, you get those big towns, they don't understand where an egg comes from. They don't understand where milk comes from. They don't understand where an apple comes from. They think it just goes to the grocery store and you pick it up. No, you have to go out, it's all produced by a farmer. And that's one thing we do is we are on a major road that allows us, because what they'll do is they'll come out of Chicago, they'll come all the way over usually to about Dubuque, Iowa, and they'll work their way down on the eastern side of the state. They'll either head back towards Chicago through the Sebula or go down to Clinton and work their way over or down, maybe they'll drive all the way down to the Quad Cities and then work their way back up to Chicago. It's a kind of a fun area to get into. Marketing is one thing that I would tell you that you need to do in an orchard, besides when you have this, because we are very marketing intense on this property, because you have to sell all your product. Now, do we sell much to other sort? Yeah, we sell outside of the orchard. We have a grocery store in Maquoketa, Iowa that picks up our stuff. But in Iowa, one thing that we have found is that there is actually a bill that was passed a couple of years ago in which the state will help the school districts pay for fresh produce. So we have 2 schools nearby who actually call and pick up buy our product. And those schools will order apples from us continually. So we know that we're going to have apple orders to Northeast Goose Lake School, which is in Goose Lake, Iowa, or we will go to Easton Valley, which is the Miles and Preston schools, which merged here this past year over in Preston, Iowa, and they will order apples from us just for that one reason, is that there is a product, there's a place that we can actually sell fresh produce directly to the schools. You'd be amazed by the number of people who will call us and say, can you throw me 5,000 bushels of apples at one crack? I'm going, no, I can't do that. We're too small. We encourage them to go to larger apple orchards in the area. Now, the one thing about that Luke is showing here on the screen is that these are our pick records, and this is how we know where things are at. My wife will also write down where things are at here for when she sprays. It's very important to keep accurate records of when you spray. Remember back to that one thing that says is that if you have a loss due to an insect damage, you have to show when you sprayed, and you have to make sure you show that you can actually count the night. So some sprays have to occur every 7 to 10 days. Some have to occur every 2 weeks. You have to make sure you can show that. If you don't show that, that is important to do. And that is also your documentation. So it's very important to do that stuff. Now, one thing here, I will, if any other questions we have here for a bit here. Okay, I'm trying to think here. We've got people now from Winterset, Iowa coming in here. Let's see here. Crops down. Okay. Luke, do we have anything else you want to talk about?
I covered it. I was just going to double check our description to see if there's anything else we mentioned we would cover. What are your thoughts on why it's so hard? Well, like, why do you have to work so hard to get insurance for apples, but if you grew corn, it would be really easy?
The big part of it is it's due to that migrant labor. That's typically what people use to pick apples. If you ever are out in California, you know, I've always been a big fan that, you know, even though immigration is a touchy subject, I'm going to flat tell you, if it wasn't for the migrant worker, a lot of the crops that are being produced here in this country would not get picked. In this case here, typically you have a migrant worker who comes through and picks apples, and that is the big reason why there is so much a requirement for additional paperwork and stuff. But that's the big part is that it's just so much work. The other part is that if you get right down to it, go back in the history of Iowa on apples. Very few people knew about this, but in the 1930s, before World War II, Iowa was one of the largest apple producing states in the Union. But it was during the 30s in which we lost that production because of a series of, you know, those super hard killing freezes that went through and got so cold for so long, it actually killed most of the trees for the apple trees. And that's why people moved their apples to Michigan, because it was warmer, or they moved up to Oregon or into Washington State. And so if you actually look at the amount of production of apples in the state of Iowa, it's very minimal. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to actually get RMA or the USDA to say that these are an insurable crop here in the state of Iowa. There's just not a lot of it growing. Because if you just drive around Iowa, what's here? You drive a field, you go see corn, or you're just going to see beans. You very rarely even see alfalfa anymore because of one thing, and especially where I'm at here, is because of the price of corn, what the price of beans are. People are that's what they grow. And it's so much easier to grow than it is to, remember, this is a more labor-intensive harvest is what this is. But it's kind of an interesting process. I know I'll tell you this much. I have been asked by Maury Wills from the Iowa Department of Agriculture, myself, and possibly a couple other apple orchards here in the state of Iowa have been asked to sit down with the Secretary of Agriculture, Bill Northey, and work with him and Iowa State University if there's a possible way to actually allow apples to become an insurable crop here in the state of Iowa. Because there is becoming more and more diverse agriculture. Again, people are starting more smaller farms because bigger farms are, you know, for the corn and beans area. But there are certain areas that can handle these smaller crops like you know, apples, cherries, those things like that, and their grapes and those things. And if you want to get to it, one of the fastest growing industries here in the state of Iowa is in the vineyard business. Even the winemaking business is a very fast growing business. And that's one reason that they're actually working right now, trying to decide is how do we let grapes and apples become a insurable crop here in the state of Iowa. And the big part is, I think it's going to take some time sitting down with our politicians and especially Bill Northey, our Department of Agriculture, and the Iowa State University people, and say, we need to get this to here. And but Maury's told me, he said numerous times, he said he wants me to come out and sit down with Secretary of Agriculture and here in the state of Iowa and get this done. And we just need to kind of work into his schedule. And unfortunately, the Secretary of Agriculture is called everywhere across the state of Iowa almost every day. And that's one of the things we're working on. And but I talked to Maury Wills the other night, and Maury said that he's always told me, he says, whenever you want to do it this winter, he says it looks like we're going to be able to set up a time and go in and sit down with Bill and talk to him about trying to make this an insurable crop.
Looks like Jeffrey might have the last question of the night. Are there any good intercropping systems to grow apple trees and another crop in between the trees? Are you thinking during establishment, Jeffrey?
Let's see here. Okay, the one thing about growing apple trees, very important, is that it builds a canopy. And you're going to need all that room in between the tree, and you don't need that much room. It's so you really can't grow much down in between them because you can't get your tractor through there to spray. You're going to use a high volume mist sprayer, and that high volume mist sprayer will actually just widen. When the tree gets pushed out a little bit and it grows up a little bit and it gets out and bushes up a little bit, you're going to be just enough room to get your tractor and your high volume mist sprayer. And remember, we don't use very big tractors. We only use a little Ford 1650 HST. You know, that's basically a little garden tractor is all we ever used, and we're pulling around all this stuff in our thing. That also has to be a way so we can actually have room to get in, pick the apples, also to mow, and there's just not enough room to plant another crop down the middle of it. And that's why you try to squeeze things together as much as possible. It's kind of fun when you look at it to see is that a possibility? I would sure like to find another way to plant another crop in between. Yes, I would. Is there room? No, there's not. But and it's always kind of fun to have that. But I appreciate the question. That's kind of I never even thought about planting a second crop down the middle of an apple row. But there just isn't enough room. Any of your questions tonight?
Yeah, Phil,
looks like we're getting close to 8:30.
Thank you for sharing this very detailed, experience you've had working to skirt around the system. And I'm really appreciative of you sharing in detail, all the different steps required for people that want to get insurance.
I appreciate the help. I appreciate people taking time to listen in.
Absolutely.
And thank you ever so much.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. And join us next week.
It was fun.
We've got another Farminar. This one's going to be talking about efficient systems of marketing and distribution. So if you're thinking about growing multiple different crops, wouldn't it be great if you had one entity that worked with 10 other farms to help market it and distribute it to maybe restaurants and grocery stores and in areas around your community, so you don't have to leave the farm as much to still sell some good crops. Thanks so much and have a great night.